It was the summer of 1972, when Daniel Royce, a 22-year-old fresh graduate from the University of Michigan, found himself driving through a torrential downpour on a lonely stretch of highway en route to a summer class in Ohio. Sheets of rain blurred his vision, and in a split second, his tires lost grip. The car spun out of control, flipped several times, and landed crushed on the shoulder of the road. In that terrifying moment, when Daniel was certain he was about to die, something extraordinary happened. Time froze. He felt his consciousness pull away from his body, and suddenly, he was watching his life unfold like a film reel playing in fast forward. Every moment, every choice, every kindness and cruelty, he saw it all with piercing clarity. It wasn't just memory. It was judgment, wrapped in profound understanding. When he came to, Daniel was lying in the mangled wreck, but astonishingly, he had only a few minor bruises. Doctors were baffled. There was no medical explanation for how he had survived without a single broken bone. For Daniel, that near-death experience marked the beginning of a lifelong spiritual journey, one that would eventually lead him far beyond the boundaries of science and deep into the mysteries of life, death, and what lies beyond. In the weeks following the crash, Daniel Royce found himself haunted, not by nightmares of twisted metal or sirens in the rain, but by the silent echo of what he had seen during those suspended moments between life and death. The life review had shaken something loose inside him. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, revealing the fragile, flickering truth behind the illusion of everyday life. Though he had survived the accident with barely a scratch, something inside him had undeniably changed. He couldn't go back to the way things were, not when he had glimpsed what lay beyond. With questions burning in his chest and sleep often eluding him, Daniel reached out to an old college friend, Rachel, who had always been a seeker in her own right. Over coffee one rainy afternoon in Ann Arbor, she listened intently and gently pointed him toward something he hadn't considered before: meditation. She introduced him to two groups, one centered on Eastern yoga and breathwork, the other exploring the ancient Jewish mystical teachings of Kabbalah. What drew Daniel in wasn't religion or dogma. It was the symbol they shared: the tree of life. The image seemed to resonate with something deep inside him, as though he had seen it before in that timeless space during his near-death experience. He began to meditate daily, slowly training his mind to quiet and his breath to deepen. Over time, his perception began to shift. Colors grew brighter. Time slowed. The world no longer felt as solid, as final. The fear of death that once ruled him began to lose its grip. Daniel was stepping into a new realm, not of blind belief, but of direct experience. And from there, his journey into the unknown had only just begun. As Daniel continued his daily meditations, something extraordinary began to happen, something no book or teacher had prepared him for. At first, it was subtle. He would feel a tingling in his hands, or the sensation of floating just inches above his body. But soon, these fleeting feelings evolved into full-blown, out-of-body experiences. One evening in late autumn, as he sat cross-legged on a woven rug in his small Ohio apartment, Daniel felt his awareness detach completely. His body remained seated, still and grounded, but his consciousness, was moving elsewhere. It was in that state that he first encountered the presence. Bathed in a golden, pulsating light, the figure radiated peace and authority in equal measure. Daniel didn't need an introduction. He knew immediately, without words, that he was standing in the presence of Jesus. But this wasn't the Jesus of Sunday school flannel boards or cathedral paintings. This Jesus wasn't here to preach, condemn, or convert. He was quiet, calm, and full of a love so powerful that it stripped away every fear Daniel had ever known. They didn't speak in words. Instead, it was like entire volumes of wisdom were being communicated in a single glance. Jesus showed him the roots of his fears, the origins of his soul, and the unseen threads connecting all life. Daniel would go on to meet him many more times in that space beyond the body, sometimes while meditating, other times spontaneously, like being pulled into a deeper layer of reality. These encounters were always healing, always humbling. Jesus never asked Daniel to follow a religion. He simply invited him to keep seeking, to keep walking the path of truth. What astonished Daniel most was how practical these experiences became. The fear of death, once a shadow trailing his every step, had all but vanished. In its place bloomed a strange confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet trust in the continuity of the soul. His heart felt lighter. His days seemed infused with meaning. With every out-of-body journey and every conversation with the light, Daniel wasn't escaping life. He was learning how to live it more fully. By the late 1980s, Daniel Royce's life had become something few could imagine, let alone believe. Nearly 2 decades had passed since that rainy night in 1972, when his car had flipped off the highway and his life had unraveled into something much bigger than he'd ever planned. What began as a near-death experience had evolved into an ever-deepening spiritual journey, one shaped by meditation, mysticism, and an ongoing connection to a presence he now recognized intimately as Jesus. But the most astonishing chapter was still unfolding. Through years of disciplined meditation and countless out-of-body experiences, Daniel found himself drawn, again and again, to a realm he could only describe as a kind of university of the soul. Unlike any earthly institution, this place was not made of stone or steel. It didn't exist on any map or respond to gravity or time as we understand it. And yet, it was as real to Daniel as the worn wood floors of his modest apartment in Columbus. The first time he arrived there, he was escorted by a being made entirely of light, neither male nor female, but deeply intelligent and compassionate. As he passed through vast chambers of glowing architecture, Daniel understood, without being told, that he was in a place where souls came to learn, not by textbooks or lectures, but through immersion, memory, and resonance. The courses, if they could be called that, covered subjects far beyond human understanding. The laws of vibrational harmony, the architecture of dimensions, the interdependence of souls, and even how to form a light body, an energetic vessel capable of traveling between realities. Teachers ranged from ancient human sages to radiant entities who had never walked the earth. Some wore robes, others shimmered in colors no earthly eye could replicate. But all radiated a unified purpose: to prepare souls for conscious evolution. Daniel visited this university 2 or 3 times a week, often during deep meditative states, though sometimes while dreaming, or even in the quiet moments before waking. What stunned him most was how consistent the structure and people were. It wasn't like a random dream. It was organized, coherent, like returning to a familiar campus semester after semester. Each time he would return to Earth with fragments of knowledge embedded in his spirit, insights that would emerge slowly through symbols, emotions, or sudden knowing. There were moments of joy, yes, but also moments of profound challenge. Some classes required him to relive certain traumas, not to punish him, but to reframe them, to see the truth that suffering, too, was a teacher. Others led him to confront false identities he'd carried for years: fear, ego, and the desperate need to be understood by others. Bit by bit, those layers fell away. And yet, despite the staggering knowledge he received, Daniel never felt pride, only humility. He understood now that true learning wasn't about collecting information. It was about transformation. In that university beyond the stars, he was not a professor or a preacher. He was simply a soul in process, learning how to love, how to let go, and above all, how to awaken. Despite the awe and wonder Daniel Royce experienced within the great halls of the University of the Soul, there remained one barrier he had yet to fully cross: the primal fear of death. Not the intellectual fear, the kind that could be soothed by philosophy or scripture, but the deep, bone-rooted terror that lives in the nervous system. Even with all the teachings, the cosmic diagrams, and the loving presence of Jesus, Daniel knew there was still a shadow buried within him. That's when the lessons shifted. His visits to the university took on a new intensity, and the curriculum, if one could call it that, turned inward, toward what the guides called practice dying. Unlike anything he had previously encountered, these sessions were not symbolic. In these realms of higher consciousness, Daniel found himself placed in vivid simulations of death, not once, but over and over again. One moment he was being thrown from a collapsing bridge, the next he was inside a burning house, and then later, he was falling endlessly through space without form or sound. In each experience he felt the full rush of panic, the resistance of the mind, and the desperate clinging of the ego. But as the simulations progressed, something miraculous occurred. The fear began to dissolve, not all at once, but like ice slowly melting in spring. Each time he died, he learned to surrender more quickly, to release control, and to trust the process. Daniel's teachers explained that most human suffering doesn't come from death itself, but from resisting it. Fear narrows the soul. Acceptance expands it. Through these trials, Daniel began to understand what the light had once whispered to him during an out-of-body encounter. You cannot be truly alive until you are no longer afraid to die. With each death, he passed through the white light, what many described in near-death testimonies. But instead of stopping there, Daniel was taught to move beyond it. Beyond the light, beyond form, into a realm of pure consciousness, where there was no shape, no self, only awareness. There he touched something unnameable, an ocean of being that defied language. And each time he returned to his body, something had shifted. He carried less fear, more peace, less urgency, more presence. This phase of Daniel's journey marked a turning point. Where once his experiences had been mystical and otherworldly, now they were becoming deeply personal, rooted in every breath and heartbeat. He realized that these practice deaths weren't about escaping life but preparing to live it with open eyes and an open heart. He was no longer just a student of the soul. He was becoming a steward of it. And through this sacred process of rehearsing the end, Daniel was discovering the truest beginning of all. By the mid-1990s, after more than 2 decades of deep spiritual exploration, Daniel Royce found himself at a surprising crossroads. He had journeyed through layers of consciousness, visited ethereal universities, and died 100 simulated deaths, all in pursuit of understanding the soul's journey beyond the veil. But what he hadn't expected was the gentle but persistent pull back to earth. After all he had seen beyond the body, a new calling began to rise within him, to fully return to the body, not just in form, but in awareness. It was during this season of inner reflection that Daniel crossed paths with Dr. Halbrook, a pioneering psychologist known for integrating mindfulness practices into trauma therapy. Their conversation over herbal tea in a quiet retreat center outside Boulder, Colorado, sparked a shift Daniel didn't see coming. Dr. Halbrook spoke not of the cosmos or astral travel, but of now, of breath, of sensation, of simply being present in the body. And for Daniel, it was like hearing a sacred truth he had somehow overlooked. All his years of ascending beyond this world had prepared him for this, the descent into it. He realized that enlightenment wasn't just about transcending the physical. It was about inhabiting it with clarity and grace. That moment marked the beginning of Daniel's return, not as a seeker fleeing the material, but as a soul choosing to be fully alive in it. He began to blend everything he had learned, the breath control from yoga, the energetic awareness from Kabbalah, and the deep listening from his encounters with Jesus, into a grounded practice of mindful living. He taught his students not to escape suffering, but to meet it with compassion, to feel the weight of their body in a chair, to breathe through fear instead of resisting it, to notice the stories their minds told them, and gently let them go. Daniel's classes weren't flashy or filled with lofty promises. They were quiet, humble, and deeply transformational. He led small, weekly groups in community centers and churches across the Midwest, where retirees, veterans, widows, and cancer survivors gathered to learn how to come home to themselves. He would say, "It's not about leaving your body. It's about finally coming back to it and bringing your soul with you." And in doing so, Daniel realized the great paradox of his journey. All the mystical experiences, the cosmic lessons, the rehearsed deaths, they had all led him here, to the sacred space of the present moment, to the sound of his own heartbeat, to the breeze through the trees outside his window. Life was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was a gift to be opened, one breath at a time. Now in his 70s, with silver hair and a steady, thoughtful gaze, Daniel Royce teaches just one class a week at a quiet community hall in southern Michigan. The man who once left his body and traveled across realms now sits calmly on a folding chair, feet flat on the floor, guiding others through the sacred simplicity of breathing. His voice is soft, his stories gentle, but every word carries the weight of a life profoundly lived. Those who come to hear him, many in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s, find more than just a teacher. They find a witness, a soul who has stood at the threshold of death, stared into eternity, and come back not to boast, but to bless. Daniel's message now is crystal clear. Until you lose your fear of death, you'll never be truly alive. It's not a slogan or philosophy. It's the hard-won truth of a man who has died 100 deaths, floated through cosmic classrooms, and learned to sit, still and grateful, in a human body. What he offers isn't doctrine, but presence. Not answers, but awareness. He often tells his students that dying taught him how to live, not just in the poetic sense, but in the real, day-to-day rhythm of being. From the accident that started it all, to his meditations, encounters with Jesus, visits to the soul's university, and the repeated practice of dying, Daniel's entire journey has been about releasing fear, letting go of control, and discovering the eternal thread that runs through all things. And now, in these quieter years, he offers that same invitation to others. Whether seated in a circle of retirees, walking through a local garden, or simply sipping tea by his window, Daniel lives what he teaches. A life not built on escape, but on embodiment. Not on mystical escape routes, but on love, humility, and the sacredness of now. Daniel Royce's journey teaches us a timeless truth. We cannot truly live until we make peace with death. For many, the fear of dying remains a quiet shadow, shaping decisions, relationships, and even the way we pray. But Daniel's life reminds us that death is not the end. It's a teacher. Through his near-death experience, mystical encounters, and deep inner work, he discovered that the path to peace isn't in escaping life, but in embracing it fully, body, mind, and spirit. He learned that love, awareness, and surrender are greater than fear, and that the most profound spiritual truth is often found in the most ordinary moment. A breath, a heartbeat, a kind word. For those in their later years, Daniel's story is a gentle call to stop running from the inevitable and instead lean into it with grace. We don't have to visit other realms to understand life's beauty. We only need to be present, open, and unafraid. In the end, it's not about how far we've traveled, but how deeply we've lived.